All right, guys. So I don't really have much to talk about today. So I figured I'd look into this whole situation. So I've kind of vaguely seen this on Twitter. Apparently, people are mad about the Game Awards. I think it's because it specifically, I think, or at least one of the things is that they nominated the Elden Ring DLC for Game of the Year, which seems pretty weird. I don't know why you would do that, but yeah, let's see what's going on.
People are losing their minds over the Game Awards. I mean, I feel like this sort of thing happens just about every single year. I mean, it's everybody's favorite hobby, right? You have your favorite games, and when they don't get nominated or recognized, you start to ask some questions. And to be honest with you, over the last couple of years, the way that things have been going, I think people are asking questions for all the right reasons.
I mean, I'm gonna be honest. Okay. I feel this way about the Oscars as well. Whenever you're mad that your game, that you're like the game that you like the most, or the movie that you like the most, doesn't get nominated, I think that you, at least for like the health of just the broader discussion, you should be forced to say, I think this thing, like this game or this movie, this thing got snubbed, and this other thing that got nominated is so much worse, right? It is so much worse than this game that it is an injustice that this got nominated and this didn't. I just feel like that would be so helpful because, like, so many times, like, people were like, well, this movie should be nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards, or this game should have been nominated for Best Game or whatever, and it's like, okay, but, like, is it, like, what should lose its place? That part often doesn't get brought up, in my opinion. Although this game now, this year now, there's like a really obvious answer, right? Like the fucking the Elden Ring DLC.
I want to say this first. I am so happy that I was wrong in my assumption that Black Myth Wukong was going to get pushed out of the Game Awards, especially with how that game was treated up to its launch and then thereafter. It's actually funny. I saw a bunch of people go back to my video from a couple weeks ago talking about that very issue and trying to rub my face in the fact that I was wrong and that it got nominated. I'm just...
Yeah, I think... God, I don't want to, like, necessarily assume too much about this guy, but I think, isn't that a thing in the games community where people are like, Black Myth Wukong isn't woke, and because of that, the industry hates it. And then the industry's like, oh, that was a pretty good game, let's nominate it for Game of the Year. So it's like, I don't know, is there much validity to that? I don't know.
Sitting here like, yeah, no, that's good. I'm happy that happened, especially after everything that game went through. What were you expecting? Hold on, I'll do it the right way. This is what you want. So this morning, I woke and I looked at myself in the mirror and I questioned everything about myself. Who is this lie? Who is this shell of a man? You don't even belong on YouTube. How dare you say your opinions on the internet, you fool!
Well, I think like the main, if there's any self-reflection, it's maybe just to not like it's maybe to understand that like maybe there were some articles that were written that were saying some weird things, but like that journalist that maybe said some dumb thing about Black Myth Wukong isn't representative of that like entire outlet, or maybe like a couple articles that came out that maybe said some dumb things about Black Myth Wukong. It's not representative of all of games media, right? Like that might be like a reflection that you could come to, that it's like, maybe this like anti-woke like thing that's currently on the internet is maybe a little overblown. I don't know, maybe that would be it, but I don't know, I guess you can do this like soy overly dramatic like response.
I'm so sorry. Now I'm getting a Game Award. But that doesn't mean that this year's award show isn't without controversy. There's actually plenty of it. Not only are we seeing a poker roguelike slip its way right into the Game of the Year category, but we're seeing a DLC and also even some underhanded or seemingly underhanded changes to the voting process.
Wait, sorry, hold on.
Roguelike slip its way controversy. There's actually plenty of it. Not only are we seeing a poker roguelike slip its way right into the Game of the Year category, but we're seeing a DLC and all.
Is that? I'll be interested to see what he has to say about Balatro. Is he going to say that like Balatro is undeserved or something? Because again, like I haven't played the game myself, but it's like I haven't heard anything but praise for that game. Like I've seen some people like shocked that like, oh, Balatro got nominated, but it's like that's like a really well-loved game. I don't know why people are like shocked that it's like, wow, how did Balatro get in here but not this other game?
Also, even some underhanded or seemingly underhanded changes to the voting process before the nominees went up.
Okay, that's interesting. I'll be curious to see what that's all about.
Now, one of the things that I've actually seen quite a lot of recently is people asking, why are you even upset in the first place? Who cares about these awards? They're meaningless. It's nothing but a show of vanity more than anything else. But I'm here to tell you that they mean a little bit more than that. Many people dismiss
me, I care.
the Game Awards as a shallow vanity showcase, a glitzy night where the industry insiders pat each other on the back and there's little substance that comes from it. But this
I actually don't know how the Game Awards work, because the way the Oscars work is that like you have like, yes, a bunch of critics, but I believe you also like in the Oscars you also have like industry professionals like voting on it as well. So like when a movie wins best cinematography, I believe it's the Academy members are made up of cinematographers in Hollywood. Do developers also vote on the Game Awards, or is it all like journalists? That would, and like, you know, because there's also the fan element too, which in my opinion, the fan element, like that in and of itself makes the Game Awards kind of pointless. Like the fact that fans even have a say makes it invalid. And I know that sounds mean, but like, I'll just use myself as an example. Let me actually look this up. I don't think I've played any. I don't think I've played any of the games that are nominated this year. Let me just look this up real quick. Game Awards nominees. Where do I see this? Oh, Game of the Year. Yeah, so Metaphor ReFantazio, I haven't played it. Astrobot, I haven't played it. Black Myth Wukong, I haven't played it. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I haven't played it. Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, I haven't played it. Balatro, I haven't played it. Like, the fact that if I wanted to, I could go out and impact and influence the vote, that in and of itself makes it invalid. Like, the fact that if you've played, like, one of these games and you're like, I really think that Black Myth Wukong should win, but you didn't play Metaphor, but you didn't play Astrobot, but you didn't play Final Fantasy, but you didn't play Elden Ring, but you didn't play Balatro, like that just makes the whole thing just not, it just doesn't make it really mean much at the end of the day, at least in my opinion. So at least I know like gamers have like a bias against games journalists, and I'm not even necessarily saying that that's all invalid in every case, but like at least like a games journalist will have played most of those games when they're voting for them. You know what I mean?
Overlooks the tangible benefits that ripple through the industry, particularly for the developers who win and the players who engage with their work. The Game of the Year award in particular serves as more than just a shiny badge. It's a moment of recognition that often carries significant financial and cultural weight. For developers, winning Game of the Year can be transformative. It's not just a morale booster for the team, it's a marketing gold mine. A game that wins the award can see a surge in sales, especially with the Game Awards coming just before the holidays, as both new and returning.
I was reading earlier today that I think Balatro, they made like $4 million off of mobile sales, just because they were nominated for Game of the Year. So I mean, he's not wrong about this.
Players flock to see what made that game so special. It's the kind of exposure that the most aggressive advertising campaign can't buy, because it means that your game is genuinely one of the best of the year, if not the best of the year. Beyond the immediate revenue, it often cements the developer's reputation, making it easier for them to secure funding or creative freedom for future projects. That recognition becomes a signal to investors and publishers that the studio is capable of delivering on excellence, giving them the leverage they might not have had otherwise. While a lot of sales can turn a lot of heads, continued recognition, player engagement, and media representation can sometimes push these games even further beyond. Just using Baldur's Gate 3 as an example, while it soared at the start, smashing sales records for the company, it was ultimately recognized as the ultimate game of the year, earning the award on every professional stage across the entire industry, totaling 7 different Game of the Year wins. As a result, the game stayed in the news circuit, keeping invested players engaged in discussion outside of the game and helping it to reach the ears and eyes of more players around the world. Hell, it's still talked about and referenced even a year later. While this is a testament to the excellence of the game itself, Baldur's Gate 3 is genuinely one of the best games in the last decade, if not one of the best games of all time. There are quite a few people that are out there that keep seeing this game talked about, keep seeing it win, and say, fine, okay, I'll try it. Now, players also reap the benefits, perhaps not in the most obvious ways, but a Game of the Year win sets a bar for quality that other studios want to strive to meet. It tells the industry this is what resonated the most with an audience and critics alike, and developers take note of it. The success of games like Baldur's Gate 3, The Last of Us, Elden Ring, Breath of the Wild, all of these inspire trends in storytelling, world building, and gameplay mechanics that ripple into future titles.
True, so that's why we need Balatro to win, okay? We need more poker card games, okay? That's what the industry needs.
Raises expectations and in many cases pushes the industry forward. Even acknowledgement of smaller titles in other categories can give a moment of spotlight, bringing a niche experience to players who may not have discovered it otherwise. I can't tell you guys how many times I found an indie title or a gem that I otherwise hadn't heard of, and it was just because it was nominated in the Game Awards. At its best, the Game Awards is more than just a vanity parade. It's a cultural touchstone for the gaming community, celebrating not only what games are, but what they can be in the end. They drive innovation, give well-earned recognition to creative teams, and expose players to games that they otherwise may have overlooked. So while the event is undeniably flashy, its impact is
this all sounds very cringe, but he's not really wrong at the end of the day.
from superficial. It's a celebration that benefits the entire ecosystem. Now, I'm not saying...
Am I irony poisoned? Is it wrong that I cringe at hearing some guy like sincerely talk about the Game Awards?
That the Game Awards create success by any means. It's just that they're giving them a little bit of an extra nudge, that little extra added momentum that's helping them get even more successful than what they were at the very start. And this is especially true for holiday buyers because they walk into stores or maybe they see an ad pop up on social media or on an app or something like that. They see that a game has that Game of the Year sticker and they think that it's a solid buy, a great Christmas gift for somebody. And chances are, more times than not, they're right. That ends up being the case. I know for years, my mom almost always would buy me the Game of the Year game because it was the easiest choice for her to make because she didn't really understand the games or the hobby or anything like that. And, you know, as a kid and then even then after, yeah, it worked almost every single time.
That's kind of interesting. I don't think my mom has never just bought me a game. She would just like take me to the store and she'd be like, hey, pick something out. Actually, no, there was one Christmas, I think, where I got a Wii, and she just gave me Lego Batman. That's like the one time that I can remember my mom like buying me a game. Which, honestly, in my opinion, I think the whole idea of like, oh, the gift has to be a surprise. They can't know what it is before Christmas or their birthday or whatever. It's like, no, if you're buying somebody a game, you just take them to the store and let them pick it out. Like, why are you trying to play like Russian roulette with whether or not your kid is gonna like get a game that they like? That's such a goofy concept, in my opinion.
But you know, the thing is that it goes beyond that. It's also just the recognition of being nominated in the first place. In a lot of cases, especially for the players, this is a way for us to come across games that we otherwise didn't have any interest in or maybe didn't even see at all. I think one of the best examples of this is Balatro. The game has exploded all of a sudden. Now everybody's talking about it, and for the most part, the vast majority of these folks haven't even heard of it. And honestly, they should probably be thankful of that. I have over 400 hours in the game, and I wish that I could get that time back. No, I actually don't wish I could get that time back. I don't know where that time went. I thought I only played it for like 10 hours, but sometimes I hear the music in my sleep. That's the power of these awards. That's what they can do for these companies. It's also what they can do for the players. Not only is it setting an example for games that we want in the future, and it's exposing players to games that we otherwise would have overlooked, but it's just that recognition that a lot of these studios deserve for the hard work that they put in delivering something that we actually wanted. And I think that's one of the most important part. But let's not kid ourselves. At the end of the day, we love validation. One of the reasons why we like social media so much is because we like seeing the little dots and likes and updates and all that good stuff, and we want to have our opinions validated, and we love to see the game that we love the most voted as the best game of the year. And you know, there are a couple surprises this year. Paul Tossi of Forbes wrote up a solid summary in an article titled "What Got a Game Awards 2024 Game of the Year Nomination and What Didn't." Writing the nominees, Astrobot, the platforming love letter to PlayStation, is one of the best entries in the genre in years, and it's no surprise that it's a celebration of not just the PlayStation IP, but what feels like gaming in general is nominated here. I would personally consider this the front runner. Metaphor ReFantazio, a stunning new RPG entry.
I mean, based on just hearing people talk and how people have talked about games this year, I feel like Metaphor is going to win, right? I feel like that's the front runner. Yes, there was a lot of people saying that Astrobot is like one of the best platformers of all time and whatnot. And yes, I remember hearing people talk about how Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was like great. But I've heard people also, like, the way that I've heard people talk about Metaphor is like, oh, this is like next level gaming here or whatever, like in terms of narrative and whatnot. So I would assume that it's going to be Metaphor just based on everything that I've heard.
From Atlas of Persona fame, this latecomer immediately captivated audiences and launched it into a surprise Game of the Year contention, which has been realized with the nomination here. It could definitely win. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This was effectively a sure thing in terms of landing a nomination beloved by critics and most fans. A win, less guaranteed, but it feels like it's dueling for the top 2 or 3 for sure. Black Myth Wukong. It has both a whole lot of fans and set explosive sales records thanks to its popularity globally, but especially in China. It's an extremely competitive year and the game reviewed well, albeit not spectacularly, and I wasn't expecting it to make the cut. I was wrong. Here it is on the list, selected by a jury, landing a top spot. A win does feel difficult given the competition, but we'll see. Balatro. Unlike anything on this list, the brilliant card game has been a sleeper mega hit all year, and I thought it might slide into a nomination here. You love to see it. Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. In the last few days, there has been a flurry of drama.
Yeah, I don't understand how a DLC is getting nominated. Like, has there not been a DLC category at the Game Awards? Has that just been like a massive oversight? It's super weird. Yeah, I don't know. I personally don't think DLC should be nominated for Game of the Year because it's not a game. Like, it's just like, I feel like that's where the conversation starts and stops. It's like it's not a game. It's a part of a game. You can't nominate part of a game that's as a game. Like, what are we doing?
Over the fact that the Game Awards confirmed that yes, DLC or expansions could be nominated for Game of the Year. While the immediate aftermath of this discussion was about a likely nomination or even win for Shadow of the Erdtree, it was still up to the voters whether they considered whether or not they would count it. Enough did, it seems. Could it win now? That would spark some more opinions. Now, these are the games that did not receive nominations. Helldivers 2, an explosively popular game that shattered perceptions of whether Sony could produce a live service hit. It has certainly had its ups and downs since its release, but it's hard to forget that stellar
I forgot that came out that year. Yeah, I mean that's definitely like, again, if it wasn't for Shadow of the Erdtree, then I would be playing the game that I talked about at the beginning, where it's like, okay, so you think Helldivers 2 is a snub? Do you think it's that much worse than Black Myth Wukong? Do you think it's that much worse than Final Fantasy Rebirth? And it's like, you can have that opinion, but I would just like to hear people say these things. You know what I mean? That, like, yes, Black Myth Wukong is so much worse than Helldivers 2 that Helldivers 2 deserves its spot. Now it's a very easy conversation of like, yes, like any any pet game that you're mad didn't get nominated, it's like you can actually just say that, yeah, the DLC shouldn't even be there. That should, like, Helldivers 2 should replace the DLC.
And it's a multiplayer entry that failed to get a nomination. This may be the biggest snub if we're playing that game. Silent Hill 2. This one was bound to be controversial as a remake, but Silent Hill 2 put up a large amount of nominations overall before the Game of the Year slate was ever even announced. It did not, however, land an actual Game of the Year.
Yeah, no, people really liked it. I feel like the whole remake thing is always very, like, weird, because it's like, how much of it is like original, how much of it is like an actual, like, testament of originality and creativity, when so much of it is, like, modeled off of the original game. But I know when it comes to, like, the Final Fantasy remake series, like, it's, like, not necessarily like a one-to-one remake in a sense, and they do so much of their own thing from what I understand, that it's not like that. Like, those games, from what I understand, count as original games. Silent Hill 2 is, from what I understand, more of a from the ground up, just kind of faithful remake that does its own things. But yeah, I don't know. I like the whole remake thing is always like a weird one for me. I'm not really sure how I feel about it.
Your nomination itself, which was a bit of a surprise. Dragon Age: The Veilguard. There was some theorizing that games journalists would rally behind this game to get it nominated, but despite its solid enough reviews and many Dragon Age fans enjoying it, it's not exactly a product similar in the full-on glory days of BioWare, and as such, it did not land a nomination. Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, that's the thing, right? Like, you would... Like, I see so many people being like, oh, the industry's corrupt, and they care about wokeness, and they hate Black Myth Wukong, and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, if all of that was true, don't you think that the secret puppet masters behind the scenes would just, like, pull all the strings to make it so that the trans woke game Dragon Age would be nominated, and the evil... I don't even know, like, what about Black Myth Wukong is not woke? I don't even know, but, like, the evil Black Myth Wukong would not get nominated. It's like that's I don't even, like, it seems like not as much of an influence as people would think, in my opinion. I don't know.
And as such, it did not land a nomination. Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. Certainly a departure from the traditional Zelda game, but still a bit of a surprise that it didn't represent Nintendo on the Game of the Year list. I suppose it's not a mainstream entry, but...
Yeah, I played this one. It's very good. I really liked it. But again, like, do I think it deserves Game of the Year? I don't know. I didn't play the ones that were nominated, so I can't definitively say.
You don't often find Nintendo missing out on a best game contender during a given year. Tekken 8. A 90 Metacritic score might normally guarantee a placement on the list in most years, but Tekken suffers from being in the relatively niche fighting game genre where it will unfortunately be overlooked by most voters. It's likely a favorite for best fighting game of the year, obviously. Now that we've gone over the summaries, a few of these games stand out amongst the rest, and they've caused quite a bit of criticism. Helldivers 2 not being in the running, Silent Hill 2, while a remake, was still received incredibly well. Balatro is an indie hit that many haven't heard of, but it still made the list, and Dragon Age: The Veilguard, for all of the praise that it got, ended up just being in the accessibility category next to Diablo 4, which, let's be real, that's more or less them just thanking them for coming. I'm genuinely shocked that Palworld wasn't mentioned anywhere, and well, then again, the media really torched that game on release, but the biggest sore thumb is Elden Ring.
Yeah, well, I think as far as Palworld is concerned, I also do kind of feel like that one was just like, that's also probably an example of that game was like super popular, but like, is it actually like Game of the
Shadow
Year?
Of the Erdtree, a DLC. This has to be
like, is it like actually like Game of the Year worthy? Like, from what I understood, and I could be completely wrong about this, like, the game, it didn't have like the best story, it didn't have like the best graphics, it didn't have like the best gameplay mechanics, like, from like, wasn't it like kind of buggy in some senses, because it was like, I think isn't it still in beta technically? So it's like it was very popular, and obviously like a lot of people had fun with it, but like, is that a game that you put up against like Metaphor ReFantasio and go like, absolutely insane that Like it is so much better than Metaphor ReFantazio that deserves to get knocked out. Like I don't know. I don't know about that one. I mean, obviously it should get knocked out for the Elden Ring DLC. Like I would put up like whatever like shitter fucking like Steam game over a DLC just for the principle of it all.
First time ever that we've ever seen a DLC creep into the category of Game of the Year, and people have been talking about it. While most people seem to generally agree that a DLC shouldn't be in the running for Game of the Year and are upset that it likely will push out whatever their favorite game is, there are some in game development and games media that have begun to push back.
At what point does a salad become a zalad? Is it when you add
I
chicken,
personally don't care.
wontons, citrus vinegar?
As an example, Greg Miller of Kinda Funny Games tweeted out saying DLC should
be eligible for Game of the Year. It's a game. It's not a game. It's a part of a game. At what point is this all going to get dumbed down to? This mission in a game should be nominated for Game of the Year. It's like, it's not a game. It's a game that people played this year. If it's that good, it should be honored. But it's just not. Like, why isn't there a best DLC category? That should just be a category. And then you recognize Shadow of the Erdtree for that.
Should be eligible for Game of the Year. It's a game people played this year. If it's that good, it should be honored. Thomas Mahler of Moon Studios also tweeted out saying, It seems
like a few people are upset that the Elden Ring DLC has been nominated. Oh, I should probably just let him read it.
A few people are upset that the Elden Ring DLC has been nominated for the Game of the Year award at this year's Game Awards. Let me be clear, I'm 100% on board with this decision and told Jeff Keighley the same a few months ago. The industry is changing and we're moving from box products and sequelitis more towards games that are kept alive. It makes sense to do so. I think that in the future we're going to see more and more games that are treated as mere platforms that are receiving updates continuously, and we should celebrate those achievements just as much as we are celebrating entirely new products.
Okay, then you celebrate the achievements for what they are. They're add-ons. You can have their DLCs. You can have a DLC category. What are you talking about? Also, like, what are they? The industry is changing and we're moving from boxed products and sequelitis more towards games that are kept alive. Like
products. Now, I could go through a ton of other.
This
examples.
isn't like a new thing. I don't even really know what he's getting at there. Like DLC has been a thing since like the early 2010s. What? I don't know.
Conversation is revolving around the exact same thing, but I just want to say that the quality and vastness of the content is not in contention. Shadow of the Erdtree was exactly what fans wanted and more. It's one of the biggest highlights this year. It was one of the things I was looking forward to playing most this year. With that said, it doesn't matter if Shadow of the Erdtree was 4 times the size of Elden Ring. It's a DLC, not a game. You have to own the base version of Elden Ring to play it. It's not a standalone title, and from my perspective, this sets a bad precedent not only for the Game Awards, but for the industry, especially because now we are just normalizing games, especially single-player games, becoming a continued platform that is recognized for the same achievements as newly minted titles, developers making brand new games incurring significantly more risk in doing so. They're not just continuing a game.
I mean, I don't care. I don't care about all of that. Like, I don't think that we should be nominating games or making decisions about nominations because of like, oh, well, this game or this thing is more, the developer put more risk into this or that or whatever. Like, that's stupid. It's not a game. It's a part of a game. It's an add-on to a game. We can make a new category like that. It's like the definitionally, it's just not it. That's really the only argument we need to make. We don't need to be like, oh, we need to give developers another chance. Oh, like I don't like none of that really matters to me personally. At least as far as nominating for the Game Awards, it's just not a game.
It's already successful. DLC is released every single year for an assortment of games. There is no reason that there shouldn't be a category for best DLC or for the games with the DLC to be included in best ongoing game. Are we supposed to believe that making a DLC is just as challenging as creating a new IP from the ground up?
What if I told you this was the last ad you would ever see?
So from my perspective, it actually feels as though Shadow of the Erdtree is more or less a proxy that was put in place to block the nomination of something else entirely. Whether that was Space Marine 2 or Helldivers 2 or maybe even Dragon Age the Veilguard.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's like conspiracy theory. I don't know that that's it necessarily.
I realize this is more of a conspiracy than anything else, but keep in mind,
Yeah.
Paul just said there were some rumblings of games journalists that were trying to push Dragon Age the Veilguard through, regardless of everything else that was going on around that game. And maybe
Did Paul Tassi say that, or did he just say that that it got good reviews? There was some theorizing that games journalists would rally behind this game enough to get it nominated, but despite solid enough reviews and many Dragon Age fans enjoying it, it's not exactly a product similar to the full-on glory days of BioWare. Okay, so no, what he's saying is that there were people that thought that the game's journalists would rally behind the game enough to get it nominated, but it didn't happen. Or like, he's not saying that it happened. He's saying that like some fans, like I'm assuming he's talking about the people that are like, oh, everything's woke, oh, everything's corrupt and woke, and the Jews are behind us. They're trying to make the frogs gay, or whoa. Like, he's saying that clearly didn't happen. Or sorry. What he's saying is that some people thought it would happen. He himself is not saying that it happened, if that makes any sense.
saying that it doesn't deserve to be on the list. Likely the most widely played game this year by the a DLC is just as challenging as Erdtree is more or less a proxy that was up. So from making a DLC is just as challenging as creating a new IP from the ground up. So from my perspective, it actually feels as though Shadow of the Erdtree is more or less a proxy that was put in place to block the nomination of something else entirely. Whether that was Space Marine 2 or Helldivers 2 or maybe even Dragon Age the Veilguard. Now, I realize this is more of a conspiracy than anything else, but keep in mind, Paul just said there were some rumblings of games journalists that were trying to push Dragon Age the Veilguard through, regardless of everything else that was going on around that game, and maybe forcing Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree into the conversation blocked that game or some other game from being nominated. It's too easy to vote for. It's likely the most widely played game this year by the most people and one of the most well-known names in all of gaming.
Well, like, that's like that's also like part of the problem of like of the Game Awards, and why, in my opinion, they don't mean much. And I know, I'm not saying, when I say it doesn't mean much, I mean in terms of like validity, right? Because when you have like a thing that's like partially fan voted on, it's like most fans are probably only going to have played like 2 or 3 games. They're probably only going to have like one game on the list that they've actually played. So they're going to be like, I played Shadow of the Erdtree, and it was good, and so I'm going to vote for that one. Like, that's part of the problem.
It would be like if Baldur's Gate 3 released a DLC. It would be the exact same thing because it's the most popular game. It's one of the most talked about games, and everybody has seen it, especially if we're talking about the panelists that they've included in this, and we're going to talk a little bit on that as well.
Ooh,
but I've seen a
who are
lot
the
of chatter
panelists?
about Balatro specifically. While there's been some people pointing out Shadow of the Erdtree, a lot of it's actually been pointed at Balatro and saying that it doesn't deserve to be on the list. And while I think you could maybe make a case for some of the other indie hits that came out this year, the game deserves its nomination. For the people that are out there that are just thinking that the game is purely poker, I'm sorry. You haven't played the game. You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. The amount of people that are trying
Lil
to
bro.
minimize this game while saying that all the other games are that much more innovative and creative when they're quite literally just copies of other games themselves is ridiculous to me. It is.
Balatro's bravest warrior out in force.
Plus, on top of that, I just personally really like the story of how the game came to be in the first place. Guys working a part-time job or a full-time job while he, at the exact same time, is working on a game for like 2 years, trying to put this together by himself to make a portfolio so that he can get a job in game development. The game explodes. It blows up. It's already spawned copycat games. It sold millions of copies. It really is a innovative, interesting game. Super fun to play. I recommend it to everybody. I made a video on it like 7 months ago. You guys need to go watch that. It was actually really good. But it's one of those games that I definitely think does deserve its spot. With that said, I will say that there is some serious inconsistency
Ooh, inconsistency.
with some of these nominations. And I think the reason why is because of how these awards are being conducted. Not only is it some of the changes that they made, to their website, to their rulings, to the games that could be nominated, but it's also
What are the changes?
the paneling. And I understand why players are upset about a lot of the nominations or how this is being handled, because they don't feel like they're being represented. To be honest with you, with some of the
True, they shouldn't be represented because they're like fucking. They've only played like 2 or 3 games in the year. They haven't played all the games. Yes, games journalists. I don't care if you think that they're woke or that they're corrupt or whatever. Like, they've played more games than you. Their voice in this very specific instance means more than yours. Yes, they do. It just is what it is.
things I've seen people talking about, well, they don't want to see you represented. Ever.
Ooh.
In an article from The Gamer titled
The Gamer. Well, the Game Awards has bigger problems than Shadow of the Erdtree.
The Game Awards has a bigger problem than Shadow of the Erdtree, the writer Stacey Henley effectively hand waves the players' questions and criticisms, saying that the rules haven't changed last minute and these awards were always going to be controversial. While at the exact same time, the article only cites itself and refers to itself when using that as proof. Literally every single link on this entire article is just referring to another one of their own articles or another writer from The Gamer. This article...
Well, what were the sources for those articles? Or, like, did they actually do journalism? Or, like, I don't know, like, what... Like, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Is all in response to people taking notice of a few things before the nominations were revealed and some of the changes that were made over on the Game Awards official website. One of the first being that DLCs were now recognized where they hadn't been in the past. Again, something that feels artificial, especially for this occasion specifically, because if not, then we would have seen Cyberpunk's Phantom Liberty nominated last year, but we didn't. Now,
I mean, that's not like when you make a decision like that, it's entirely possible that they could have just happened to come to that conclusion that DLC should be nominated this year. Like, I don't like that. It's not like an unbelievable thing that's a thing that's a conclusion that they came to this year. I don't understand why. I don't understand that point there, because he's saying like, well, why wasn't Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty nominated last year? And it's like, because that wasn't the rule in place that year. But like, I don't understand how the Game Awards are supposed to like retroactively like travel back in time in order to maintain consistency. Like, that's I don't get that.
Now, along with all of this, players also noticed that the voting is calculated with a voting jury taking up a whopping 90% of the vote, while players and fans only make up 10%.
Yeah, players and fans shouldn't make up any percentage of it. It shouldn't make up any percentage of it. The fans' votes are worthless. Sorry, it just is what it is.
Meaning that players are only a deciding factor in the event of a tie, and even then, their votes are likely not even a factor. And that's the reason why players are raising questions over the awards, because they feel like they aren't being heard or represented.
They shouldn't be heard or represented.
In fact, we know that we're not being represented. The panel of judges are from outside outlets that have nothing to do with gaming at all. Looking at some of the
that might be a valid point.
Outlets in the U.S., we have Entertainment Weekly, the L.A. Times, the New York Times, Pride.
Well, I mean, do those outlets have games like gaming sections? Do they have like journalists that cover games? Because if that's the case, then that's totally fine, right? Like, I know the Washington Post has Gene Park, and Gene Park is like the games writer. So I don't know if that's necessarily the case for all of these, right? For Pride.com or for Rolling Stone or for Variety, but it might be possible.
Pride.com, Rolling Stone, The Atlantic, NPR, and Variety. Looking at the UK, we have Discussing Films and The Mirror. Many of these sites...
Hold on. Well, what was about
sites and magazines are nothing more than celebrity gossip and tabloid magazines.
Is that necessarily true? Hold on, let me do some research here. You know what? That actually might be a valid point, because I just looked up like one of the examples there. I'm on the Discussing Film website. They don't appear to have like a dedicated games section. So it actually is kind of weird that they would be nominated. I don't know if they sometimes write about games or if, but like I'm trying. Let's see. I'm just like looking up Astrobot. Yeah, I don't think they write about games. That actually is a weird one. Although, you know what though? This is just kind of a weird one, isn't it? Because is it possible that is it maybe like possible that that maybe some of these outlets are voting for the best game adaptation? I don't know. It's that actually is an interesting point.
Magazines. Nothing representative of gaming culture, the perspective of players, or representative of the industry in any way. I'll be straight with you guys. This makes no sense to me whatsoever. I know that Jeff Keighley has been pushing for the award show to be more like the Grammys or something like that, upping the ante each year, but this feels like groveling at Hollywood's doorstep more than anything else. Jeff, we're winning. Our industry dwarfs music and television by a country mile. We do not need their approval, and frankly, the last thing that any video game player wants is Hollywood's influence in the gaming industry.
Yeah, it's just like interesting because I like the only thing or the only conclusion, sorry, the only explanation I can think of is that maybe those other outlets are voting on best game adaptation, right? Because there is an award for like for best movie or TV show based on a game. So it's like, is it reasonable for Discussing Film to vote in that specific category? I mean, probably, because they watch the Sonic movie, they watch The Last of Us and Arcane. So maybe there definitely should be. Maybe it is disclosed and I just haven't seen it, but they definitely should disclose like what exactly these people are voting on.
Henley chalks up the awards being controversial no matter what because of toxic gamers, hand-waving their concerns, saying maybe it's more controversial this year because of everything that's going on in gaming. There are a few who dread Shadow of the Erdtree's potential nomination on quality. It's roundly considered an excellent expansion to an excellent video game. The issue is the principle of the thing, and gaming has been short on principle this year. A groundswell of toxicity has risen unchecked this year in gaming. It has an outsized influence in the YouTube algorithm and on X, the everything app, as long as it aligns with Elon Musk's increasingly erratic views. But it is still disheartening to see gaming companies shove their fingers in their ears, though it's impressive that they manage to do this while their heads are buried in the sand at the same time. I don't expect Keighley to address this on the show, and I don't think he could say anything to help, but his stay out of everything attitude will not wash this time. He'll be in the meat grinder with the rest of us, and it remains to be seen how a man buoyed by populism and never having a public opinion beyond loving a video game deals with that. She then goes on to say that if Black Myth Wukong...
People always say that, but like Jeff Keighley just like stays out of the whole culture war thing, and it remains fine every year. The Game Awards never suffers because of it, to be honest, at least in terms of like viewership and stuff.
Stellar Blade don't sweep the awards, then gamers are going to feel like the entire thing is rigged. And after stating, when these folk demand Black Myth and Stellar Blade sweep the board, I see replies like, what about Final Fantasy? What about Astrobot? What about Metaphor? What about Infinite Wealth? What about Dragon's Dogma? What about Balatro? What about 1000 Times Resist? And the reply I see from these apparent fans is always the same. I haven't played most of them. These people don't even have opinions on games. They just like being mad. They're the only people who ever cared about Dustborn or Unknown 9, and yet they parade around their heads as if they bested Rob Stark. If this campaign had started...
I mean, listen, I literally just made this argument, but I'm not making it from the... I'm not even really making it from the perspective of, like... From, like, a political perspective. But, like, yes, it is absolutely true that fans just shouldn't have a voice in these things because they don't play most of the games that come out every year. That just is what it is. It probably should be up to the people that have the most breadth of of gaming consumption that are deciding these types of things. Now, I think the solution at the end of the day could be, right, is that sure, we can have the games journalists voting, but also maybe like the YouTubers like this guy. I don't know if he votes. I don't know if how many influencers end up voting at the Game Awards, but maybe they could get this guy to participate, or maybe, I don't know, people like Asmongold, right? People that like, or like Moist Critical, right? People that dedicate themselves to playing many games in the year.
Started a few months earlier, Hogwarts Legacy being snubbed at the Game Awards 2023 would have been huge news. People that like Black Myth Wukong and Stellar Blade are immediately looped into the group of these people, games that only had controversy because it was manufactured by Games Media, and the players felt...
I mean, let's be honest, right? Like, there is like a Venn diagram of these people. Like, I mean, it just is true. I mean, obviously, like, I just based on the bit that he read there, it is probably fair to say that she is like ideologically captured. So like maybe that journalist like wasn't in good faith looking at the criticisms. Like if she didn't bring up the fact that we have a bunch of like movie websites involved in the process, like it's reasonable to complain about that. So I'm sure that journalist is like very ideologically captured and that the article wasn't written in good faith, but like, are we not going to agree that there's like a very significant Venn diagram around the people that like Black Myth Wukong and Stellar Blade and that are also anti-woke and yada yada yada? Like, can we like let's just be real. Let's not like not live in reality here.
That they had to stand up to protect those games that they love and enjoyed, and they want to make sure that those games are recognized. Right. So the only solution to players not feeling represented by the industry is to have the industry speak out against those players that you disagree with, to put them in their place. And you're upset that Jeff Keighley doesn't...
Yeah, that's just like... That doesn't need to be Jeff Keighley's job. It's like, wait, I'm not saying that Jeff Keighley can have an opinion if he doesn't want to, or if he wants to talk about this stuff, he can. I don't really care. But it's not his job necessarily to do that. Like, he doesn't have to if he doesn't want to.
Doesn't want to get caught in the middle of that and feels like it's not his place to do so. This is no different than the media campaign to get Keighley to say anything about industry layoffs. Like, that would have any impact outside of virtue signaling over something that you can't control and ultimately don't even understand. If you're wondering where all of this is coming from, it's because we're already dealing with so many issues where players are not feeling represented by these gaming outlets. Our perspectives are not shared, and oftentimes it feels like the media's perspective seems adversarial to its own audience. That's why players are speaking out. It's only controversy because you made it controversy. The disparity in representation of the Game Awards voting process highlights a troubling disconnect between the event and the games.
Yeah, so I agree and I disagree. Like there almost certainly is like an element of games media being adversarial towards gamers, which leads to gamers being adversarial to games media, which leads to games media being adversarial to gamers. And you know, was the chicken or the egg? Which one was the first? I'm not going to pretend to like necessarily know, but we're here. We are where we are at regardless. So it's like I agree with him on that, but as far as where that leads to the Game Awards themselves, it's like in this very specific instance, like yes, the gamers should not be represented because the gamers en masse, they're not going to have the breadth of knowledge and experience that would actually make the Game Awards a legitimate award show, right?
That it's supposed to celebrate when 90% of the vote is controlled by a jury of industry professionals who a lot of them have nothing to do with gaming at all. It undermines the credibility of the awards. Players see this as yet another example of their voices being sidelined, a reoccurring theme in a relationship between gaming media and its audience. This isn't about players just wanting popular games to win. It's about us feeling like our preferences, priorities, and experiences are dismissed in favor of industry politics or critical preferences that don't align with the average player's perspective.
Which is fine. Like, that's not a bad thing necessarily, right? Like, the critic's perspective, okay, the task of the Game Awards is to look at the broad breadth of games and decide what is the best game. That should be the task of the Game Awards. The player's perspective, the average player's perspective, is completely irrelevant to that, because the average player's perspective is not able to analyze the broad breadth of games that come out in a year. So yeah, the average player's perspective, it's irrelevant to what the Game Awards is supposed to be.
Invest countless hours into games, dissecting mechanics, narrative depth, and the passion behind the development process. I think what we're seeing right now is a massive contrast in the games industry because of social media, the internet, and gaming's explosive popularity, where gamers are now more educated and engaged with these games than the journalists that are scoring them and the panelists that are awarding them. Players love their games. Of course, they're going to be upset when they see that their favorite game isn't being recognized. But when they see an industry that is constantly pushing back against them, that's including Gossip Magazine.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that. Like, I don't know that it's... Your average gamer is not going to play as many games as the person whose job it is to play games. I mean, that just is what it is. So, like, no, their opinion on what the best game of the year is not going to be as valid. I mean, I like, that just kind of is what it is. And maybe you disagree with them ideologically, and maybe you think that their ideology is factoring into it. But again, if that was the case, then Black Myth Wukong wouldn't have been nominated, I think, and Dragon Age the Veilguard would have been nominated. So it's like, if I were to guess, I think it's probably more so the case that, yes, there are some games journalists that are very ideologically motivated, in the same way that there are going to be some gamers that are very ideologically motivated, but it's maybe not representative of the industry as a whole. But they just they're just so loud that they take up so much oxygen. I feel like that's probably the case. Maybe I don't know.
To vote the best game of the year. Who are you to say that they're wrong? And I think that's my industry that is constantly pushing back against them. That's including Gossip Magazines to vote the best game of the year. Who are you to say that they're wrong? And I think that's my biggest concern when it comes to all of this. It's that growing divide between games media and the games industry and the players. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And you're only making it worse when you're adding in NPR and Variety and Rolling Stone and New York.
Okay, hold on. Okay, I'll try one more time. Hold on. Okay, hold on. I'm on the Variety website. They do in fact have a gaming section. Okay, it's not a dedicated gaming section. It's like digital and gaming, where they talk about other stuff, but they do talk about gaming. Okay, Variety does have seemingly journalists that their beat is to cover gaming. Okay, we got one. Let's see if we can find another. Okay, I'm on the Rolling Stone website as well. They also have like gaming. They have a senior games editor, so they cover games as well. Okay, I'm not sitting here doing a big deep dive into every single outlet. It seems like this guy's point might be a little overstated. My guess is that when you look at a lot of these outlets, they probably do have journalists within them that do cover gaming. So this might actually not be as strong of a point as I had initially made it out to be.
Worse when you're adding in NPR and Variety and Rolling Stone and New York Times and LA Times. What do they have to do with video games? Let's be real. The vast majority.
Yeah, they might have like journalists that cover games.
Majority of these outside outlets are likely going to vote based on popularity, whether or not they've heard of the game or not, because they likely haven't even played them in the first place. And
that's a massive assumption. It's actually it's actually crazy that this guy is like, the player's perspective the player's perspective needs to be heard, when it's like, newsflash, buddy, the player's perspective is going to be the most popular game wins. That is what the player's perspective would be. Let's just be real. Let's just be real about that.
That serve to do? Does that share the perspective of the players? No, I don't think that it does at all. So of course players are going to push back against it. Of course players are going to feel like it's somewhat unfair, because in truth it is unfair. And I think it's really important that these games are
I mean, it's really not.
represented the way that they should be, because there are some really tangible benefits to being nominated, to being awarded. And, from a player's perspective, if I see Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree win Game of the Year, am I going to be happy? Sure, I really liked it. It was really good, but I also don't think that sends the best message
I mean, I wouldn't be happy because that's just stupid.
to the industry. What are we teaching them? What are we telling them? Are we going to be optimistic about it and say they're going to go, oh, we just need to make really good DLC? Or are they going to say, hey, our single player games, why do we need to make sequels to any of these? Why should we bother making new IPs? Maybe instead what we
Honestly, wouldn't that would actually be interesting if instead of like sequels, we got more like really strong DLCs. Would that necessarily be a bad thing? Like immediately Spider-Man 2 comes into my mind where I'm like, that game was like nowhere near as innovative as it was. And like, what if like Spider-Man as a platform? What if they made so that like, and I'm just like spitballing here. Like Insomniac is making a bunch of X-Men games next. Like, what if they made an X-Men platform, and instead of like an X-Men game trilogy, over the years they just like doled out like really high quality DLCs that are essentially games, but they're not games with like these massive expectations on them. Because like, I like one of the big problems with like Spider-Man 2 was that it just didn't feel like innovative enough. Like for like a full from the ground up sequel, it wasn't like I don't know. At least in my opinion, it was a little lacking. But maybe if it had just been like a really, really strong DLC, it maybe wouldn't have felt that way. I don't know. That's a food for thought. And I know obviously the answer is like, well, make a really groundbreaking sequel. Sure, that's actually a very valid pushback to what I just said. I'm arguing with myself here. Okay, I'm schizophrenic.
To add on to the games that we already have, which they've been doing in the past, but maybe now they want to push into it even further. So, I mean, I hate to be a doomer about it, but in most cases, they don't really like to make the right choices in those kind of things. And a lot of it is money motivated. And let's be real, if you get Game of the Year, it does earn you some money. I can't tell you guys how many times I had friends that reached out to me because they kept seeing Baldur's Gate 3 getting mentioned, whether they were winning another award, whether players were talking about an award or something like that. And these folks that, never played a turn-based game before finally gave the game a shot because they just kept hearing about it. So at one point in time, it all has to be true, and I got to give the game a shot, and that's how it works for some of these games. That's not saying that these awards make successful games, like I said earlier, but it does really give them an extra boost that keeps them in the spotlight, gives them a little bit of extra money, and, those games deserve it when they actually deserve it. So, I don't know. I don't really know what like the solution to something like this is either, because like I don't really see the Game Awards somehow.
I mean, based on all of this, the solution is to have rules that make sense. You just shouldn't nominate DLCs. It's not complicated. The DLC is not a game. It's not a game, so it shouldn't be nominated for Game of the Year. You should have your own category for DLC/expansion. That's actually like a very easy solution that makes sense.
How getting closer to the perspective of the players. I mean, this whole like 90 versus 10% thing is just like...
Yeah, it should be 0%, okay? Screw the players. You don't matter.
Crazy to me. Why do you even have us vote if that's the case? Because...
True. Yeah, based. Don't have them vote. Yeah, like the Oscars don't have fans vote, because guess what? Like... most people have not seen The Substance or Challengers. If we had let the fans vote, they're just going to vote like Deadpool and Wolverine as the best movie of the year. Which, listen, if you are honestly believe that to be the case, I don't want to... obviously, all art is subjective here, but like, you haven't seen all the other great movies of the year, so it's like, you can't really definitively say that.
9 times out of 10, our vote doesn't matter.
Based.
Right? Well, I guess it's probably not really exactly how the math works, but
Based.
I would guess that the vast majority
Your
of
vote
times
doesn't
our votes
matter,
don't even really
shouldn't
count.
matter.
I would almost bet that they probably don't even check it to begin with. Why would you? They're not even necessary at that point. And yeah, I don't know. Anyway, tell me what you guys think. One of the other things I'll bring this up to before I finish. Looking at some of the awards and some of the different nominations, things don't really make a lot of sense. Because looking at like ongoing games as an example, how is Diablo 4 voted for best ongoing game, but we're not seeing Warframe as an example, or Path of Exile, when those games are not only more popular, but more successful and also more liked by their communities? I mean, Path of Exile is an example. They've been developing and continuing to support the base game while they're making a new game, and then plan to still support both equally in the future. How are you not showing some love, appreciation, and shining a spot?
Because and this is also like now we're at an impasse where you're like, why don't you have the same opinion that I have? It's like, I don't know, maybe the voters just think that Diablo 4 is a better game. You can agree or disagree with that, but like, he's like not even considering that as a possibility. He's using like weird metrics like, but it's more popular. He's like, what?
Spotlight on that, especially for the kind of value that it brings to the players, the kind of appreciation it shows to the players.
Yeah, more people appreciate Deadpool and Wolverine than Challengers. Challengers is a better movie than Deadpool and Wolverine. Like, what are you talking about?
I saw Asmongold recently brought up another Crab's Treasure for games of impact because of how well it does, environmentalism and things like that. Metaphor would be another really good.
No offense, but another Crab's Treasure's like environmentalism message is like not well done at all. It's not subtle at all. It's not very well written. Like, it's not a very well written game. Like, no offense, it was actually a fun game. I never beat it, but it was a really fun game. But like, I wouldn't necessarily nominate it for that category.
Good example of a game that could make it into games of impact. It's one of the very few games in the last few years that I've seen be able to cover a topic like diversity in the right way. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, share the video with your friends, like the video.
That's
subscribe.
also like such a like. I wish that you know what I wish more than anything. I wish we could just get back to talking about art and media in terms of like how good it is or bad it is. Because, and listen, I haven't played Metaphor, so I don't know. But my guess is when he says like Metaphor does it in a right way versus how maybe Dragon Age does it in a bad way. Like, I mean, you guys can let me know if I'm wrong in the comments, but like, does it essentially just boil down to Metaphor is a well-written game and Dragon Age is a poorly written game? Is that not where it ultimately boils down to? So like, what I'm saying is that when we criticize Dragon Age, do we have to criticize it by being like, oh, it's woke? Oh, they're pushing the woke agenda. And like, shouldn't the criticism just be like, man, this writing is very stiff. The voice acting is bad. Like, why can't those just be the criticisms instead of like attacking the very notion of like trans stuff being in a game? Unless you just don't think that trans stuff should be in games. I mean, at that point, you're just kind of a hateful person. But but I'm talking about like the most of the people, right? So I don't know. Food for thought or whatever, I guess. I guess to wrap up my thoughts. As far as the Game Awards, I think the whole DLC thing is stupid. Cringe. Not based. I think that making the player's voice less impactful, that is based. That is how it should be, because the gamers, the broader player base, they don't have the breadth of knowledge and experience of games to be able to properly vote on these things. I mean, that just is what it is. Especially like, to be fair, like I'm sure some of them do, but there's no way to control for that. Because if I wanted to, I could vote for best game of the year. Right there, that means that the system is broken. So yeah, in my opinion, like fan votes just are not like a meaningful thing at all. And yeah, I think like the most interesting point that he brings up is the fact that there are some outlets that seem weird to be there. Although, and I only looked into like 3 of them, right? I looked into Discussing Film. It doesn't seem like Discussing Film writes about games. However, I looked into 2 others. Variety does write about games, and Rolling Stone does also write about games. So it would be interesting to see how much of those outlets actually write about games or not. So it might not be that big of a deal. And it's also possible that like people like Discussing Film are put in there, right? They mostly talk about movies and TV shows because they also maybe the only category that they vote in is the best adaptation category. And in that case, I actually think that that's entirely reasonable. I like my guess is that they can probably opt out of voting for best game of the year if they don't feel like they can reasonably do so. And I suppose the hope is that Jeff Keelman is like properly regulating all of that. So yeah, we'll see. At the end of the day, I don't know, just go play a game, be happy, and bye. I don't know. I have no idea what that outro is.